Welcome to the Yale Center for British Arts online series At Home, Artists in Conversation. I am Thomas Allen Harris, Senior Lecturer in African American Studies and Film and Media Studies at Yale University. I'm delighted to welcome Billy Gerard Frank to our program today. Before we get started, there are a few housekeeping notes I'd like to share. Please note that this program will be recorded, your camera and sound are muted and will remain so throughout the program. We will be using the Q&A feature located on the navigation bar to gather your questions for Billy, and they will be answered at the end of the program. Please feel free to submit questions at any time during the program. Land acknowledgement. Yale sits on the land that Indigenous people and nations, including the Mohegan, Mashantucket and Pequot, Eastern Pequot, Skaghegook, Golden Hill, Pagonset, Niantic, and the Quinnipiac and other Algonquin-speaking people have stewarded through generations these lands and waterways of what is now the state of Connecticut. We honor and respect the enduring relationship that exists between these people and the nations and this land. I am very happy to acknowledge and welcome Billy Gerard Frank.
Thank you.
To this talk. Born in Grenada, West Indies, Frank is a multidisciplinary artist who works at the intersection of visual art, filmmaking, design, education, and activism. Frank is the founder of the Nova Frontier Film Festival Lab in Brooklyn, New York, which develops and showcases films and art from and about the global African diaspora, the Middle East, and Latin America. He is a lecturer in directing and design at the David Geffen School of Drama at Yale. Frank's work addresses issues of migration, race, and global politics as they relate to gender, minority status, and post-colonial subjects. He represented Grenada at the 58th La Biennale de Venecia 2019, the Venice Biennale, and has the honor of being one of the artists in the collective representing Grenada in the 2022 Venice Biennale. Welcome, Billy.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Thank you for that introductory. I'm really honored to be in conversation with you today. And thank you, Yale Center for the British Art, for allowing us this opportunity to be in dialogue today. And I look forward to speaking to you. How are you today?
I'm doing good, thank you.
Wonderful.
So I guess, just to full disclosure, you and I have been friends and colleagues and collaborators for over 2 decades. And I think that when we really got to know one another was in the year or two before the Obama election, when we were part of a group of artists who were engaging in a weekly conversation around ancestry, around identity, around migration, healing. And so that group is called the Untitled Group, and it featured Lyle Ashton Harris, artist, and Layden Lewis, designer, Oren Squire, playwright and television writer, and Melvin Galloway, who works in philanthropy. And so it's interesting because what I see in some of the work that we're going to be sharing has, tackles certain themes that the group also helped, me personally think through. And so I'd love you to just talk a little bit about the Untitled Group and, just to kind of lay the groundwork so people can be caught up with our ongoing dialogue.
Yes, this is actually a good opening in that sense, because the work that we did in Untitled Group was very instrumental for me. Just want to say the group started out of this deep need that we all had as queer Black men in New York, looking for community, looking for spaces to create other communities outside of the mainstream narrative that we were told of how we're supposed to behave and operate as queer people. And very much, taking, say, examples from Essex Hemphill and other people like that, queer brothers who were creating communities for themselves. And there was such a need for a community like we created. And it wasn't just about conversations that we were having. It was a space in which we were cooking food, exchanging family recipes from Grenada and, you know, your travels all over the world in Africa, and many conversations and images that was explored and looked at, exploring archives, specifically you and your brother's archive. And it really did give me the agency, if you will, to look at my own family archive, to feel safe to basically have interventions around autobiographical memory, very similar to your own work. That's My Face, the 12 Disciples of Nelson Mandela. So all of these, the conversation and what came out of that, I think, really did give me the impetus, so to speak, to go back to Grenada after having been, I created my own sort of exile for many years before I went back to revisit my dad. And the work that we did in this group really helped me to find a voice as an artist as well.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, Billy, I think it would be great if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and your relationship with Grenada. You were born and raised on an island that was part of a series of islands that are connected to Grenada, I think, and how you left, why you left, just to give us a little bit of background of who Billy Gerard Frank is.
Yes. So, you know, the great Stuart Hall mentioned in his essay, Cultural Representation and Identity, that the practices of representation always implicate the position from which we speak or write, the positions of enunciation. For me, the West Indies, Grenada specifically, represents such a place for me from where I speak and write, the place in which I enunciate. And I was born actually on a small island, which is the smallest of the sister isle of Grenada, called Petite Martinique. A lot of people don't even know where it is, but it's situated in the archipelago of the Grenadines between St. Vincent and Grenada in the Lesser Antilles. Petite Martinique and Carriacou are the smaller islands that share similar seafaring and agricultural economy. The islanders are also continue to share embodied memories around traditional rituals and cruel heritage that are connected to the African, French, Scottish ancestors that is celebrated in the music and danced. And one of the main craft of the island is boat building, seafaring, which dates back to the African ancestors, as well as the Scottish ancestors. My own dad was actually a well-known boat builder on the island that was sort of sought after. I left the Caribbean at the age of, I was sort of in the late teens, and went to the UK and also New York. But I was part of that generation from the 1980s that were leaving Grenada after the revolution. And we're talking about a generation that left, that followed sort of the examples of the generation that left in the 1950s, the 1960s, the Windward generation. A lot of the Windward generation came back, a lot of them in Grenada. For instance, the revolution that started in Grenada in the 1980s, this was really started by people who came back from England and abroad studying. And I went during that period in the 80s when a lot of people were leaving. And we left mainly because of education, to seek advanced education, but also for economical reasons. People were leaving to make a better life of themselves. And a lot of the West Indians who did move to the UK and moved to Grenada, it moved to the USA, played a very important role in the ideas, in the creative intellectual development in the UK as well as in the USA. My own formation as such, and imagination around moving to a place like, say, Great Britain or the USA was definitely moving off the heels of people, say, like V.S. Naipaul, some of the other writers that had lived and left and went abroad and had created, became artists, filmmakers, and important writers. So I was actually, those were the people who gave me sort of the impetus to leave and to think that I could have a life as a creative or intellectual in the USA today.
And to what degree was the exile or leaving have to do with your orientation and your expression, your gender expression, with regards to being on a small island?
That played a very important part as well, because at the time when I was living in Grenada in the 1980s, I felt that I was just beginning to explore my sexual identity and orientation. And I knew there was not a place for me there at the time, specifically the things that I wanted to do in the arts. And it did have a major part to do with that. But I do think that education and the need to better oneself had a much more larger motivation of why I wanted to leave. I had created my own exile when I left. It was almost a kind of poetic exile. Maybe I had my own kind of romantic notion around exile, reading, people like George Lamin's work. A lot of the writers that I had liked, Jean Rhys, for instance, is another writer that I had really looked up to, people like Jamaica Kincaid, who had left the Caribbean. But I think it was, for me, it was a necessary exile in order to develop myself as an artist and to have some perspective to look at the other in order to do the kind of work that I was doing.
Yeah, I think this might be a good time to look at the second Eulogy, your first presentation at the Venice Biennale. Could you set it up for us? Because, in some ways, it seems to me that it has a relationship with autobiography, but it's not autobiographical. But it's also so much about exile and the return. So I'd love you to just set it up, and then we could play that short clip.
Yeah. So second Eulogy, Mind the Gap, kind of, it's autobiographical work. It's definitely an autobiographical intervention, exploring generation of a family. My own dad, as I mentioned, I had a sense of exile around him and estrangement, more family estrangement in that sense. And I took him when I went back to the Caribbean after 18 years of not returning. And when I went back, I began to excavate my own family archives and exploring letters that was written between each other over the years that was unanswered. And also just looking at his own estrangement from his own dad, who left the family when he was quite young and went to Tobago. So, and I also wanted to connect the work to cultural tropes in Grenada, for instance. The jab, the veku, all this kinds of cultural trope ended up in the film. It's definitely an autobiographical film, but it's also a film that is weaving fiction and nonfiction to conjure up a kind of abstract story of interconnected life. The central character being a fisherman on the island, and who is actually my dad, who is looking for his own father, weaved within my own story of looking for my own dad. So the question of identity, the question of representation, the question of colonial rule is very much in the film.
Okay, so let's move to that next slide, which is the clip of the film.
Do you know your father? What's his name? Do you know your grandfather? And your great-great-grandfather? And what about your mother? Who are these people to you? Speak your grievances or hold your peace. What is your father's name, boy?
So, Billy, I guess I'd like to ask you to just share a little bit about the title, Second Eulogy, Minding the Gap.
Yeah, the title came out of my first film that I did called Absence of Love, that was also exploring a relationship around my own dad. It started after a relationship ended in New York, and I noticed that there was a sudden achieved pattern in terms of the relationship I was forming with people that was deeply connected to my own identity around my father. And I wanted to explore it as a film using James Baldwin's text, love does not begin and end the way we think it does. Love is a battle, love is a war, love is growing up. And I thought it was a beautiful text that I wanted to use in this first film called Absence of Love. And so that was for me like the first look of my relationship with my dad, and also looking to break archaic patterns, and also having cathartic experiences of what those relationships meant to me. So when I went back to visit my dad a second time, this was when I actually began to really dive into the family narrative and the archive. And that's where the title come from. It's kind of, and he had died at the time. So it's the idea of like a second revisiting, second eulogy. Minding the Gap is the idea of minding this family archive and looking at relationships from multiple angles, not only the cultural, but also looking at the psychological effects of these relationships in my own life, present day. And very much, the work that I mentioned that we were doing in the Untitled Group, I remember one of the exercises that we had was to write letters to our father. And if you remember that, and you yourself have some background with Grenada as well. And I think that came out of that for me.
Yes, it's interesting because I think that my grandfather, who I did not know and also was not raised with his name, I didn't know his name either, was from Grenada, and Audre Lorde is from Grenada, and it's so I want to actually come back to that later on, but I just want to say
a distant family.
Yes, exactly. We could be distant family, exactly.
Yeah. Audre Lorde is also a distant family.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I didn't realize that.
Yeah,
okay.
She was the families in Karakou.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I wanted to just say that, how poetic and beautiful the film is, Second Eulogy. I saw it not in Venice, but I saw it at a gallery in New York. And, because I wasn't able to experience it at Venice, I did not see the entire installation. Mm-hmm. And I think that this, could you talk a little bit about this painting and its relationship to the film? Yes.
Yeah, as a multidisciplinary artist, whenever I'm working on a body of work, there's usually a film, there's usually large canvases or stills from the film, sculpture. This painting is part of the body of work. It was done on raw canvases. There was silkscreen images. The image in the center is actually my dad. There are also silkscreen letters that I mentioned that I was exploring between me and past lovers, me and my own dad. There is boats. Some of the images are hand stitched onto the canvas because my dad was a boat builder. And the suitcase are letters and other texts that came from exploring my own family archive. And viewers are able to read the letters, look at postcards and other personal mementos that was part of this larger archive that I continue to explore in my own work around my father.
Could you talk a little bit about the significance of the colors that you're using and also the canvas?
A lot of the colors are actually, I work a lot with primer colors, and these colors are actually, some of the colors actually represent Grenada flag, the yellow, the green, the reds, but also I tend to use a lot of indigo in my work. Karakou and Petit Martinique were former indigo plantations, and that was a major source of economy during slavery. So I tend to use that color a lot in my work, and it's a theme that I'm going to continue in this new body of work that we're going to look at as well. That's going to be in the Biennale de Venezia, representing the Grenada Pavilion.
Well, actually, let's move forward and talk about this new body of work. And could you just tell us a little bit about Palimpsest, Tales Spun from the Sea and Memories? And this is a work that has not yet been seen by anyone but you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
and this is a painting, though, etching or painting.
But this is an etching that was done by Richard Costa. We can actually go to the next slide.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this was an etching that was done by Richard Costway. So the project to begin is based on the life of Kugwanu. Kugwanu was an ex-slave who was a major abolitionist figure in the UK in the 18th century. He wrote a book called Thoughts and Sentiments and the Evils of Slavery and the Human Species. That was a seminal piece of writing during the abolitionist movement. He was friends with Oleado Equiano, who was also an African that was a very important voice in the abolitionist movement. Equiano also wrote a book called An Interesting Narrative. However, Kugwanu was kidnapped in Ghana at the age of 13 by Africans, brought to Grenada, where he spent a short time as a slave. And in Grenada, he was brought as a sovereign by Alexander Campbell, who was a young Scottish plantation owner on Grenada, and brought to England. When he got to England, he was baptized and his name was changed to John Stuart. Baptism was a way of one gaining one's freedom in the UK. And Kugwanu then went to work for Richard Costway and Maria Costway. Richard Costa was a prominent painter in the UK in the 18th century. He was actually the appointed painter for the royal family. He was friends of King George III. He was many other writers, prominent writers like William Blake, the poet, Sir Joshua Reynolds, the painter, Grenville Sharp. So Kugwanu worked as a sovereign in the house of the Costway. Richard Costway was married to Maria Costway. Maria Costway actually had a relationship with Thomas Jefferson. The film Jefferson's in Paris loosely kind of alluded to that relationship. But they were very important painters. They lived in the Schomburg House in Pall Mall Street in London. And Kugwanu actually worked there and developed his work and wrote the book there while he was a sovereign. This image of Richard Costway did with Kugwanu is the only image we know today of Kugwanu. The work is actually the etching is actually in the Yale British Center collection, and this work is courtesy of the Yale British Center as well. The work in the film, I actually projected it on a wall, and it's a very important piece of work because the other etching to this is in the National Portrait Gallery in London. I was very interested in this portrait because Kugwanu is seen in a very subservient position. Yet at the same time, when you read his book, Thoughts and Sentiments and the Evils of Slavery, it's a very politically charged piece of work. And it's such a dichotomy against the work that he was doing as an abolitionist in this position in the home of the Kugwanus, in the home of the Costways. Also, people like Sir Joshua Reynolds we can go to the next image as well, were very important in, say, supporting his work. And this is actually just an image of the book, Thoughts and Sentiments and the Evils of Slavery.
Was this the original graphic on the cover?
No, it's not. Actually, this is a Penguin classic, but the work next to it is the original of the book. So it was, people like Sir Joshua Reynolds helped to support Kugwanu while he was actually writing the book, and they would have given him, money to pre-publish the work. So it's important to note that he was supported by all his artists, and he was really exposed to all the pageantries of class of Great Britain. And he's one of the first Afro-Britain to have penned a book in English at the time. He died in obscurity, and people like Equiano, who is his best friend, are more well known. For instance, the book An Interesting Narrative is a very well-known book. So I was interested in exploring his work from sort of multiple angles, specifically exploring it from the position of the multi-subject position, the sense that he would have to create many personalities. He was a self-made man, specifically looking at it alongside, say, contemporary culture, looking at, say, Paul Gilroy's work, the Black Atlantic double consciousness. modernity and double consciousness. And also just looking at Cugoano's life, say, vis-a-vis Malcolm X and people like Martin Luther King. And when I think of Cugoano, he was more of a Malcolm X, whereas Equiano would have been more like a Martin Luther King, who was appealing to the compassion of the English, whereas Cugoano was just really quite a political activist in that sense, and a little bit more rebellious in his writing, specifically, using the Bible throughout the work as a way to kind of condemn slavery, kind of using the master's tool to dismantle it in a way.
So he was very much an early abolitionist.
Absolutely.
Based in Britain, and so one thinks about the reception that Frederick Douglass had in Britain when he went on his tours and speaking tours, that this about a century before, plus or minus, Cugoano had been doing this work. And
we can go to the next slide as well.
Pardon?
We can go to the next slide as well.
And he was part of a group called Sons of Africa.
Yes, which is a very, very important group during the abolitionist movement. Equiano was also part of that group. They wrote letters, including letters to King George III and newspaper and other abolitionist members in the UK, and people asking them for the support to end slavery. It's important to note as well that Cugoano was one of the few who was asking for a complete end to all slavery, whereas some of the people like Grenville Sharp wanted like a gradual end to slavery because they were afraid of the loss of economy for the plantation owners. And also, when you think of slavery, a lot of people was involved in it in the UK, from the boat building industry, the steel companies, what have you, merchants. There was also indigo and sugar and teas and everything else that came out of the plantations in the Caribbean that was very important for the English people. So it's important to note that Cugoano was quite the rebellious one in that sense, and was asking for complete end to slavery, not only for Africans, enslaved people in the Caribbean, but for all forms of enslavement. I think his work stood out in that sense.
Mm-hmm. I really appreciate you showing both the causeway painting, but also some of these images. Could you talk a little bit about some of the research that went into constructing this filmic narrative? And maybe I'll just read this text, and this text is from Palimpsest. A time will come when you will journey to distant and unknown lands, cross many oceans, rivers, and continents, see the treachery of man in all its forms, walk among royalties and kings in high places, speak with dignities in foreign tongues, confront terrifying people, places, and things. But remember where you come from and what your name is. Speak your name, boy, before you forget who you are and where you come from. What is your name, boy? Yeah. So this is such an evocative text, juxtaposed to the story you relayed around his moving into freedom is about having this new name, this British name, and the idea of double consciousness, to be able to operate within this, kind of colonial system and try to maintain his identity, or identities, I should say. Could you talk a little bit about this text and how it plays in the show?
So the text is actually the opening of the film. His future is revealed to him in Ghana by his great aunt. This text is actually a recurring text throughout the film, and the voiceover of the aunt. And it's almost this reminder to remind him to not forget his identity. And I had used a similar device in second Eulogy, Man the Gap, where someone asks the father, "What is your name, boy? Tell me your name before you forget who you are." This idea appeals to me in a sense because it also is a reminder to me, as somebody who has left the Caribbean, it's about not forgetting one's root. It's about looking at cultural identity and representation and mining the space and where one comes from. Specifically in Cugoano's situation, the fact that he had to baptize, his name had to be changed to John Stuart. This is a similar thing that happened to Equiano, where he had to change his name. But when they began to write, they use their African name, which is a very interesting thing. Kwame specifically was exposed to all the pageantries and class of 18th century England, working within the home of the castaways. So I think this is something that would have been very important for him in terms of, as he was writing and exploring himself, who he was and the space. And one of the things that the Sons of Africa was trying to do, they had started a movement of to bring people back to Africa, as Sierra Leone specifically. And they were really looking for their identity and who they were as people within the context of these spaces.
I'd like to move forward with the slides so we could see some more elements of this, of the piece.
Yeah.
So in some ways, the piece is taking us through various aspects of Kugano's life. Could you talk a little bit about what we're looking at now, these beautiful images?
The film is set in Ghana, Grenada, and England. Because of COVID, we had a lot of difficulties trying to travel to different places to shoot the film. We didn't even think we were going to be able to shoot the film because of all the difficulties that we had in terms of just raising money, in terms of trying to figure where we're what location. So the whole film was shot in Grenada. This is young Kugano in Grenada as a house servant, what they would call a page boy in the house of Alexander Campbell, who brought him to England. And I'm playing a lot with the themes of indigo, as I mentioned. So in this particular scene, he's crying blue milk. And the blue milk for me is, as I mentioned, Carriacou and Petit Martinique were both former indigo plantations during slavery. So I wanted to explore this idea of the transatlantic, the idea of indigo, the idea of blue milk as a metaphor throughout the work. And this is an image that comes up throughout the film.
There's a text I just want to share by Michelle Commander in her book, Afro-Atlantic Flights, Speculative Returns, and Black Fantastic. The innumerable series of flights taken by Black Americans towards Africa are necessarily bound with speculative cultural production, which consists of fantastic worlds that often blur chronological time and portray interactions between real, ghostly, and imagined figures. As a genre, speculative fiction gives authors the ability to ask relevant questions about our own society in a way that would prove provocative in more mainstream forms. So it makes me, if we can go with the next slide, if you could talk about why you chose the form of this installation. I believe it's going to be a double screen installation.
No, it's going to be a single channel, but there's going to be other works accompanying the work. Throughout the film, I'm also using 8mm camera. I love using 8mm camera in the Caribbean because it creates this other ghostly presence within the film and sort of disavow this image that we have of the Caribbean as this beautiful landscape. Usually, whenever I shoot with the 8mm, there is always this magic and dreamy quality that I see within the work. Specifically in this work, there's going to be a lot of this kind of the usage of different kinds of camera to tell a story, specifically when looking at, say, Africa or looking at Grenada alongside Great Britain. In this image, this is Kugano studying in Great Britain in a library. He was sent to school by Alexander Campbell when he went to England, but he himself had a deep passion for education and knowledge. When you read his work, Thoughts and Sentiments and the Evils of Slavery, you see a lot of influences of Shakespeare within the work, a lot of influences, say, a King James Bible in the writing that can feel a little bit archaic for a modern audience when reading. So I'm trying to bring the work into a contemporary setting as well by employing so many kinds of device to create the story.
Can we go to the next slide?
Yes. This is just more images of the film, so we can just go through the...
And before we go forward, could you just talk a little bit about your work with actors? Because both the way in which you find certain actors and this particular actor as well, because I think this, yes, tell us a little bit about your...
So the actor is actually the actor who's playing Kugano. His name is Jermaine Rory, and he's actually an actor from Jamaica who does a lot of folkloric one-man pieces. He's also been in Broadway, Fella, Cats, many projects. He's worked in the UK. I wanted an actor who could embody as someone who the transatlantic experience, specifically someone who could understand the texture of the work and embody Cubano in Africa, in the Caribbean, and this kind of transatlantic journey that he had. So I felt that this actor really did embody that. His performances is actually quite great. Young Kugwanu is played by Jakim, who is an actor. He's not really an actor, actually. I work a lot with unknown actors. It's just people in Grenada. All my projects, whenever I go to Grenada, I look for people who just kind of could fit the character. They're not really actors. And this is a way that I actually love to work, just casting non-actors within the work who could bring a kind of freshness. I mean, Grenada has so much talent in that sense. So I do feel that there's a lot of untapped potential within the Caribbean, specifically around theater, around film. And whenever I go there, I'm always surprised by the finds. This was a very simple, organic situation when I went there finding actors.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And you also have a background in production, design. And, when I look at this and the other slide you showed earlier, one really sees that the space is activated through design. If you could talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, so the film was shot in the Tower Estate in Grenada. It's a working agricultural sort of plantation. And I shot my last film, Second Eulogy, Man the Gap, there as well. We had to bring a lot of the items that was needed for the film, specifically for 18th century England, to Grenada. But there was a lot of stuff I was able to pull from the house itself that is kind of a rich trove of history. So in working, making the film, I'm also exploring the space and archiving the history of the Tower Estate within the work. So a lot of the stuff that you see in the film was actually found in the tower as well. So I like this idea of marrying this work within, and I do think that I was meant to shoot the work in Grenada because there's just so much just fell into place once I got there in terms of production design, in terms of all the elements that was needed, actors. It was just a really great experience.
Mm-hmm. Let's go to the next slide.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is an image of Kugwanu with a video camera, VHS camera, and this is on one of the forts in Grenada, Fort Matthew, I think. I was curious to bring him into the future, documenting almost sort of like a journalist, a voyeur, if you will, some of the plantation, the ruins of colonial past in Grenada, asking the question, what was this all about? So I'm using footage as well of the VHS within the film. So it's almost this idea of a meta film in terms of having an intervention within these colonial spaces inside and the reoccupation of Kugwana returning to these sites to document it as someone coming into the future.
Mm-hmm. So it truly is kind of an Afro-Atlantic flight.
Absolutely.
Across time.
Yeah.
Let's go to the next slide.
And this is a recreation of his baptism in Great Britain. And we can probably go to the next slide as well. Yep, so I wanted to talk about this slide a little bit. So this is the Shakespeare Mask, which is the Grenada collective, the cyber collective, is mining the Shakespeare Mask this year in the pavilion. And the theme of the pavilion is is all around exploring this. It's a tradition, a synthesis of African, French, as well as British traditions and culture that has created this creolization of Shakespeare. Performances dress up in these costumes and perform Shakespeare, usually Julius Caesar. And when someone get it wrong, they're hit with a stick, kind of imitating West African stick fighting. So this is going to be the main theme of the pavilion would be exploring the Shakespeare Mask. I'm interested in Shakespeare from the perspective of my work, from double consciousness and the idea of the multiple self that Kwame had to employ in order to work in Great Britain. So I'm using a little bit of Shakespeare in the work, but not a lot. But this is what the audiences at the Venice Biennale would encounter. And a lot of the artists in the collective is also looking at it from multiple perspectives in a contemporary setting as well. So it's a creolization of Shakespeare that has happened over the years in Carriacou. This is very unique to Carriacou, one of the sister island of Grenada. And it's the only place where this is performed that way. It's just was recognized by the World Heritage UNESCO as a very important tradition. And even the Shakespeare Society in the UK has recognized it as a very important celebration of Shakespeare's work.
Let's go to the next slide. I'd like to continue this conversation around the collective and also the representation at the Venice Biennale, because Grenada, relative to other Caribbean islands, has had the most consistent or most number of projects at Venice.
Yeah, this is our 5th time actually being at the Venice Biennale. I do think there's been a lot of conversation lately about the Global South and why that Grenada or the Global South should be represented or should even have a pavilion in the Venice Biennale. I do think it's a very important conversation to be had, because the Biennale is a space where artists, specifically from places like Grenada and the Global South, could contest the political as well as social issues within as well as outside of their own country. In my own work, I am contesting larger themes, specifically in Grenada as well as outside of Grenada. So I do think it's a very important space for artists from the Global South to be in Venice, specifically at this time, especially as institutions are exploring, their own archive through a sort of a decolonized lens. I do feel that we have, it's a space in which we could have a voice right now, specifically because the Caribbean for such a long time has been sort of seen on the periphery of the art world. And we have so much to say and so much to do. It's a really important time for Caribbean artists as well to really be in this type of platforms to contest and to explore their own culture, and also to look at it alongside the global art world that has always seen the Caribbean artists within a specific lens. I think it's a very important time for us to come together as Caribbean nations to have a voice in not only in Venice, but also to create our own, pavilions and biennales.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great. So I think this would be a wonderful time to open up to audience questions on the remaining 10 plus minutes. And so thank you so much, Billy, for giving us an advanced preview.
Thank you.
Venice. I'm looking forward to seeing the project in Venice, hopefully in late May or early June. So while we're waiting for audience questions to come in, I wanted just to talk a little bit about, or ask you a little bit about the notion of a kind of a queer exile, because right now, if one is reading in the news, there is increasing intolerance in, various African countries around gender nonconforming and queer folks, who have to leave as well. And I was also thinking about your first film, Second Eulogy, and how you found the actor in that film who had not acted before, but you found him through an online app.
Right. And there's also, Thomas, I think 3 questions.
There are. Oh, great.
Questions, yeah.
Okay, great.
I know that we're running out of time right now.
So we have the first question. Can you talk a little bit about the music in the film? It's so moving, so haunting and emotional. Do you have a certain composer you work with, and what is the process for selecting the music you like?
Yeah, so the music was composed by James William Blades, who's a young British composer. He has worked with artists like Tiesta Gates, recently did work for Beyonce, Black is King, Kahil Joseph. And I wanted a composer who could marry specifically sounds of West Africa, songs of Grenada, and also a European sound. So working with James was just a really great process. In that sense, we had recorded a lot of songs on Grenada from some of the rituals and traditions that we had shot. We worked a lot with the kora, which is from West Africa, was one of the main instruments throughout the film, and also the cello. So I wanted a sonic landscape that could marry all these various places that the film was navigating and spaces, so to speak. Similarly, I think in this new work, I'm looking at it almost as a quintet. So an audience could come into it, they could enjoy the music like they had just come into a chamber music, a concert without images. Again, I'm marrying songs from Ghana, West Africa, songs of the Caribbean. So there's a similar kind of, a sonicscape that we're creating, except that I'm thinking of it more in the sense of a quintet, because it's 18th century England, the spaces in which Cubana was working, like the Richard Costware's home, and the kind of music that people would be listening to around that time.
Great, thank you. So the next question we have from the audience is, as an interdisciplinary artist, what is your own studio process and practice like? How do you work?
A lot of my work is around, usually I work whenever I work, I'm doing a body of work, I work in themes, and the theme of the work usually sort of help me to start the archival process, the research process that I work with. I also collect a lot of archival images from the newspaper, clippings. I'm also an avid reader, so the work is influenced by things I've read or things that interest me. As a creative, there's specific kind of themes that I always go back to, specifically around the Black Atlantic, the diaspora issues. I'm also the founder of the Nova Frontier Film Festival that showcases films in the Caribbean and Latin America, the Middle East. Those are regions that also interest me. So from that, I begin to, sketch ideas. I begin to write a script. The paintings and the sculpture and other work come out of that as well. So it's usually a long process of maybe 6 months or to a year. The Cubana project I started to explore during COVID last year. And that also came out of conversation that I was having with other Caribbean artists, groups that was meeting on Zoom, including the collective actually was having these kinds of conversation around mining kind of our culture, mining of the past, and trying to support each other during COVID. So a lot of my work comes from research and things that are interesting to me.
And there's also a way in which it engages art history, thinking about another image of Eulogy, Yale, that's held by the Yale Center for British Art, that Titus Kapoor did a reinterpretation of, or a response to, I should say, Enough About You, and thinking about the various paintings and etchings that you compiled for this project.
Absolutely, yeah. And I was actually very inspired by, for instance, there was a show as well at the Musée d'Orsay around the Black model and
Posing
modernity.
Yes.
That was also at Columbia University. There were some important works there. For instance, the Manet painting Olympia. The curators actually renamed it, I think, Glory, naming it after the model that was in the painting. Similarly, William Hogarth and people like that who has painted Black characters in the work. I was also exploring this type of work alongside this Cubana work, similarly of like Black figures, how they were represented by white European painters, kind of dismantling that image specifically. This work in a way is a kind of a dismantling of that image.
There's another question, which sometimes I feel so ambivalent about a bit. What's next for you in the process of realizing this project? What's next for you? What ideas or projects on the horizon that you would like to see realized? And I think that, we've talked a little bit about your interest in turning this project into a fictional film that would be released, and given the experimental nature of it and the way in which you're dealing with time and also these locations, just wondering about how you're thinking about that kind of translation.
Yeah. Okay. And I also saw a question from Oliver Benoit, who is one of the members of the Grenada collective. He says, my students from the Caribbean identity class, he's a professor at the university there, are listening. Can you place your work in the context of the Grenada identity? Which is actually, I think, is a great question, because all my work, specifically in the beginning, I had said my formation as an artist started as a Grenadian. I am a Grenadian artist. I go back to Grenada and make work in Grenada. And Grenada still plays a major, major influence in all my work. Second Eulogy was set in Grenada. This film, based in Kwama's life, was also shot in Grenada. The landscape of Grenada, our history, informs my practice in everything that I do. And it's always kind of, even when I work in the United States on projects, the early upbringing of my life in Petit Martinique, exposed to boat builders and seafarers, has played a major role in my own work as a Grenadian Caribbean artist. And there would be no Billy Gerard Frank as a multidisciplinary artist without Grenada. So that kind of is what I would have to say around my own identity as a Grenada, and which brings me back to the work of Jean Rice and White Sagacity and all this work that she created, even though she was living abroad. When you read a Jean Rice novel, there's ever the presence of Dominica, where she was from, is always there in the work. I feel the same way with my own work. This ghostly presence of Grenada and the verdant landscape in which I grew up is always present within this kind of work. Yeah.
So I think we have time for maybe one last question. And perhaps I'll just read a quote by Stuart Hall. The audience as community has come to depend on the performer's skill and on the force of a personal style to articulate its common values and interpret its experiences.
Stuart Hall has played a really important role in my own work over the years. When I think of him, actually, we have a lot of similar background in terms of growing up middle class, Scottish background, African, all his many influences. I mean, he's a theorist, and he was an academia and a writer, and I also employ writing in my work, but I think he has played a very instrumental role, specifically his work around cultural identity and representation. And I really love the idea that he thinks that when he thinks of identity, he sees it as something that is always in process, never fixed in that sense, always in. And when I think actually of Kwama's life as well in terms of identity and representation, this is actually the lens through which I was exploring Kwama's life as an identity that is always in process, because he was very much a self-made man in many levels. Somebody who is navigating the landscape of the UK, the pageantries and the class and the double consciousness that we had spoken about before.
Thank you, Billy. Well, we have one last question. It's by my former student, Nada Stewart, who actually first introduced me to Jab Jab in some of her works and my course last year, Archive Aesthetics and Community Storytelling, who's also in Grenada, who I connected you with. And
she is from Carriacou, actually.
From Carriacou, okay. How do you balance your passion for autobiography while valuing the privacy or values of your family? That's her question.
Yeah, this is actually a big one for a lot of people who are having mining the family biographies, and doing autobiographical work. For me, I first value myself and I value my work, and a lot of the work that I do is exploring not only the family biography, but larger national history that is intertwined in a way with the family biography. I think it takes time. Obviously, you as a filmmaker who's done a similar kind of work, you know what that is like. I think it's a process that, happens over a long time of gestation and mining. It took me a good 30 years to have any kind of intervention around the autobiographical family narrative or any kind of archive work around family. And because my work is so deeply personal, it has always been a mining and an exploring of the autobiographical, out of fiction. And I don't see one or the other as been different in that sense. So I feel that for me, this has really been my life and the kind of work that I've been drawn to, and the kind of filmmakers I've been drawn to were filmmakers, who are always exploring autobiographical memory and having that kind of intervention, including people like yourself, Thomas.
Yeah, and I would just also add, Billy, someone who, again, knows you well and knows a little bit about your spiritual practice in terms of Buddhism and a sense of deep compassion, so
Yes.
it's a certain ethical considerations you make, but they come from a level of a deep introspection and a deep sense of compassion. I also know that you have your relationship with your family, is one of open dialogue and support, even through difficult times.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I would say in the process of making this kind of work that I make and going back to Grenada specifically, I was able to create deeper bonds and relationships with my family in that process, because my revealing of myself is also revealing them and forcing them to look at their own reflection, basically,
Thank you, Billy.
Yeah,
This
thank
has
you.
been a wonderful conversation, and in some ways a continuation of our Untitled Group.
Absolutely. And I look forward to more conversations, and I hope to see everyone at the Biennale de Venice and the opening of the Grenada National Pavilion.
Wonderful. I wish you all the best there. So to close the program, I want to thank you again, Billy. I'm afraid we're out of time, but please join the Center for its next online program, a conversation which will take place on Friday, March 18th at 12 noon Eastern Time with Highland Booker, couturier and painter, and Christine Chensinka, Senior Curator of African and Diaspora, Textiles and Fashion, Victoria and Albert Museum, London. And thanks everyone again for attending this
Thank you
conversation.
all.